Brittany Cavallaro, and they have a new book together, and that's where we'll start. So which one of you wants to tell us about the new book?
You want me to tell the story of the book, Bree, and you can tell the story of how we met?
Yeah.
All right. Well, Brittany and I wrote Sunrise Nights together. It is a YA novel in verse, but also in conversation. We each got about two poems apiece into the book, and we both said, I miss dialogue, and because we both love writing dialogue. So we had to experiment a little bit with the verse novel form and write dialogue sections, which dialogue has its own sort of poetry. So that was fun. Sunrise Nights is the story of two artists, Jude, who I wrote, and Florence, who Bree wrote. Jude is a photographer. He's struggling with OCD and anxiety that is being exacerbated by the divorce of his parents. Florence is struggling with a degenerative eye condition, which is affecting her ability to dance, her balance to be a dancer, and she's a talented dancer. Jude and Florence meet at Harbor Arts Camp in the fictional town of Harbor City, Michigan, in northern Michigan, along the shore of Lake Michigan. They go to Harbor Arts Camp every week of camp. There, at the end of the week of camp, there is a night where the kids get to stay out all night, enjoy each other's company. There's a bonfire, there's all sorts of activities. If they want, they can just go explore the town, and businesses stay open late for the kids. And it's called Sunrise Night because the kids are allowed to stay up all night and watch sunrise together. So Jude and Florence meet on Sunrise Night, and they decide to go off and explore the town together, just on a whim. Just they're strangers to each other. They're just going to get to know each other. So they do, and they have a wonderful time. They just walk around all night and they talk about anything and everything and nothing all at the same time. But they make a very interesting decision, especially in light of the way that kids now interact, where they'll be sitting in the back of a car together, texting each other, even though they're sitting side by side. Jude and Florence decide, partly in tribute to the Richard Linklater Before Sunrise trilogy, to not stay in touch over the ensuing year, but to meet up again at the next sunrise night and pick up where they left off, and then do it again for their third and final sunrise night. Did I capture it, Bree? Is there anything I left
You
off?
did a great job. You always do a great job.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating book. I finally got a NetGalley and have been pouring through it, and I love the structure. I love the back and forth, and I really like, as you mentioned, how you guys come together with dialogue. Because I'm a loose interpreter of what a novel in verse is, right? And I read, oh, okay, so they're doing these conversation things that are quite interesting. Bree, why don't you tell us about why did you hook up with this guy in the first place? Because you do a lot of verse stuff, and you do kind of. Um, I love the Charlotte Holmes book. I've read the first one, and I thought, oh, why haven't I known this book before? So, and I would say in tone, they're different than Jeff's books, and the settings are quite different. So, how did you link up with this guy?
Yeah. So Jeff and I had our debut novels come out the same year in 2016. And I was lucky enough to read an advanced copy of The Serpent King, and I was a really big fan of his writing. And we ended up doing a lot of the same festivals and a lot of the same events. And Jeff really quickly became one of my best author friends, somebody who I would go to talk about writing and to talk about the weird world of publishing that we had just found ourselves in. Um, and over the years, we would send each other, early copies of our books, and find ourselves sometimes in some of those positions that Jude and Florence find themselves in sunrise nights, where we'd have a couple hours to kill at a book festival. And Jeff and I would be, at a convention center or a high school in a town we'd never been to before. And we'd find ourselves like, walking around Target for a couple hours to get out of the venue, sniffing candles, or, we've eaten weird desserts in every town in the American South, probably, it feels like. We were just really good at killing a couple hours. And over the years, I realized that, really Jeff had become one of my best friends. And so when he was writing In the Wild Light, which is his book, which is in part about a boy who goes to a boarding school and ends up taking a poetry class there that really illuminates things for him. Jeff was talking to me about it for details because I had gone to a boarding school, and I teach at a boarding school now. I'm a poetry teacher. And so I was reading some of the poems that Jeff was writing in the voice of this character, and I was really enjoying them. We were really enjoying talking about poetry. We were sending each other recommendations, and my PhD is in poetry. Poetry is really my first love in a lot of ways. And so I came to him with the idea of us maybe writing a novel in verse together, because we were talking about poetry all the time anyway. So that was really where Sunrise Nights started. And, like Jeff said, we got a couple poems in, and the two of us both love writing dialogue, and we both also just love talking to each other. And so it was fun to be able to come up with a form for Sunrise Nights that really reflected that.
Well, good choice and good job. And already, not to give anything away, but there's people eating weird things on donuts, and there's people going to Target and talking about Target in the book. So I'm thinking, okay, so you're not just making some of this stuff up. You've lived some of this stuff, right?
One of the
We
things
definitely
that
have.
one of the things that Jude and Florence did not do, but that is one of my favorite things I've done with Brie on multiple occasions now, is we go to a bookstore, we go to the poetry section, and Brie just loads me up with poetry, because it can be really intimidating just to look, arrive at a poetry section, and most poets are mostly read by other poets. They don't tend to bubble up into the popular consciousness. So you're looking at just hundreds of these slim little volumes with names like Storm Toward Morning, which I know is one of Bree's favorite poetry books.
It's by
All
Malachi
these
Black. It's wonderful.
gorgeous. I set you up for that plug, Bree. All these slim little poetry volumes with gorgeous titles, but you don't know any of them. And so you need somebody like Brie as a tour guide. She'll pull out a volume, open it up, page from memory, read you a stanza in her wonderful poetry reading voice, hand it to you, and you just walk out with a stack like that. I cannot recommend the experience enough. She's a wonderful poetry valet, poetry sommelier. Yeah.
We were
Well,
doing that on tour last week because we were, of course, doing events in bookstores. And so, 10 minutes before the event, we would go over to the poetry section. And I would start shoving books at Jeff. And the best thing about recommending books to Jeff is that he reads them and will talk to you about them. And so secretly, I'm always just looking for somebody to talk about my favorite poets with. And Jeff is a perfect person for that.
Well, that's great. I look forward to running into you, Bree, sometime and maybe having that experience.
I would love to.
That's really great. Sometimes you get stuck at NCTE between Alan and Monday night. There's nothing to do at Alan, so I think maybe I could con Bree into doing that poetry. I think that's a good exercise in finding things that you need to find that you can't find on your own often. Correct? Right.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, that's I'm a little sad that they didn't have a small, unique bookstore in this town that they could explore in the middle of the night. I like the notion that it's at the summer camp, but both of these kids are suffering from, a condition that makes them unique. And I don't want to say this book is sicklet, right? In that it focuses on that. But what kind of focused you guys to kind of choose these two ailments that each character has? So with Florence and the really interesting eye condition that I knew nothing about. And I think, wait a minute, how were you a high school teacher 25 years and didn't hear about this one, right? So That's good. And then the OCD and the trauma associated with divorce is more common. But why did you land here as a connecting point between the characters?
Do you want me to start? Yeah. So Florence has the same sort of rare combination of eye conditions that I do. And it makes a lot of sense that you hadn't run into it before, because I'm one of those unicorns
Mm.
in the ophthalmologist's office where, like, I sit down at a new place and the doctor calls in one resident and then another resident and then another resident, and everybody's taking notes. Um, you feel like a very weird celebrity. So my condition when I was a kid meant that I just had a lot of trouble moving spatially through the world. I didn't
Mm.
have good hand-eye coordination. I had terrible balance. I am blind in one eye, and so I clip doors and doorways. I have to take somebody's arm when I'm going down a flight of stairs or down a hill. I really, interpret distances through how large something is rather than there's a lot of calculations that are happening a lot of the time. And I was lucky in that the thing that I wanted to do with my life, the thing I loved most in the world, was something that I could do without moving around too much. I could read books and I could write books while sitting very safely in a chair. And a few years ago, I started pushing myself to be a little bit more physically active, and I've been working on sort of improving my balance physically, doing all these things. And I've been experiencing a frustration that I haven't really felt since I was a kid, of trying to do something that my body really isn't made for. And the thing about my condition is that it doesn't really get worse on any set schedule. It has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with stress. It has to do with circumstances outside my control. So I can, for example, get really good at something, and then when my eye condition gets worse again before it's corrected by surgery, I will just lose all that progress. So I was thinking a lot about what it would be like had I been the same kind of sort of driven, impatient, ambitious kid that I was, but that if the thing that I loved was something that I wasn't going to be able to hold on to forever. Um, it's I think it's already hard being an ambitious teenage girl, and being a teenage girl who is confident in herself. Weirdly, I feel like that comes with this big side of insecurity, because the world really does not want you to be a confident
Yeah.
teenage girl. And I was really interested in what it would feel like to be somebody like my character Florence, who is a modern dancer and a really good one.
Yeah.
And she's worked really hard to be where she is, and she's watching that sort of slip away. And so that was where I started building Florence's characters, from that place of frustration.
Well, I want two sides for people that read the book. The introduction to this character is really strong, really, really good in terms of getting that sense of anxiety and relaying to the reader that this is an accomplished dancer who is on the verge of knowing she's going to lose it to some way. And also, one of the really touching scenes for me was when she has to kind of tell Jude what's going on when she grabs his arm, when they don't really know each other, right? And hey, slow down, buddy. This isn't really a come on. But and I'm putting that in my words, but that scene is really, really well done. And so I guess I say by message of people who run into this, if you haven't read the book or you're not convinced to read the book, because it's not just a book in verse, but it's a book with really well-drawn characters and really tight scenes that go, oh, this is really a craftsman's touch in how these two characters are getting to know each other. And I mean intimately, in the true sense of we get to know each other deep within our souls, not with a sense to, oh, how soon can we get it on? It's not like that. It's how soon can we really connect with both of us wanting to share deep emotions I think, desperately wanting to do that and filling out that ground in a really quick way. So Jeff, what about Jude? Is he an embodiment of you now that Brittany's made this confession, or?
Yeah, I mean, so none of my characters are like a one-to-one depiction of myself. I'm not interesting enough to be one of my own characters. So, but with Jude, as with all of my characters, there is a good chunk of myself, a piece of myself that I can plant in other soil to see how it grows. And I certainly, I was so impressed with Bree's, candor and vulnerability and how beautifully she wrote Florence and Florence's condition. I felt like I needed to bring something to the table too in terms of honesty, vulnerability, and candor. So I really just wrote what I knew, which was I know anxiety, I know OCD, I know what it feels like to have something in your life that can make the thoughts stop, that can make the swirling, recursive, intrusive thoughts pause for a second. And what a blessed relief that is to have that. And so for Jude, that's photography, which is an art form that I engage in as very much an amateur. I think I have a decent eye for, composition and beauty, which I mostly use to describe things in books. But if the photos there, I'll grab it. And cell phones make it easy for you to be, an amateur photographer. And I could really imagine being a much more serious photographer. And it was easy for me to imagine how that discipline would be a relief to a kid like Jude.
Yeah, I think that's a really good description. I like that, Jeff. That idea of being able to control a moment helps you focus with everything else, right?
Sure.
Um, and I'm finding, like I told Jeff earlier, I'm having a hard time being retired, which I didn't think would happen to me. I was 40 years in education at one level or another, and I realized that a lot of my anxiety, or I have one of those minds that never shuts off. Well, if you're going from class to class to class, you have a focus for 15 minutes. But now when I have this mind that won't shut down and I don't have to do anything, I don't have to write the next article, I don't have to do the next thing, that it's been a little frustrating. I thought I probably didn't learn to take the natural ways to, slow my mind down, because they were given to me by my choice of careers, right?
Sure.
And now all of a sudden I think, okay, here you are going on, 69, going on 70, and you have to think, wait, I feel like an adolescent. So maybe that's good to feel like an adolescent as old as I am. Well, so both those characters, what a good description of both of those. Where have you been with the book so far? It hasn't been out long. And what has your publisher helped you do, or have you organized some travel events on your own? What's that looked like so far?
Well, we just got off tour. So seeing Bree is we are not strangers to each other, right, Bree? Uh,
No.
we started off at King's English. We went to Nashville on my home turf and launched the book at Parnassus and got to see some friendly faces there. We then rented a car. Harper rented us a car, and we traveled. We road trip north. We went to Newcastle, Indiana, and had a really lovely event that was sponsored through the library there at their sort of arts association, their arts center. And they bought 100 copies of Sunrise Nights and gave them out for free to people who came.
Oh,
So we got book lovers. We had a great crowd. They had a chocolate fountain going. I mean, it was just a really good time. So we went from there to Traverse City, Michigan, the model for Harbor City,
yeah.
and Breeze home turf.
Yeah.
And we're still not done yet. We're going to do the YA Midwest Book Festival in Naperville, Illinois, through Anderson's Bookshop in, I think, July 27th. And then who knows? It'll be exciting to see.
I'd love for you to come somewhere close to here to Las Vegas or I keep thinking a really good event that not enough people go to is the Baton Rouge Library System in Louisiana has a pretty good festival. I don't know if either one of you've ever been,
I've
and
been a couple times.
I'm struggling to remember if it's fall or spring when they do that. But I think the combination of the two of you at that would be so. If you have a connection who hooked you up with them before, Jeff, I think you ought to explore it and say, why am I not invited with Bree to this event? That's good. Well, now as the old teacher in me, I'm dying to know how often you wrote in isolation and then came together with pieces, or did you sit down and write dialogue from time to time together? So tell me about the writing process of this book, and did it radically different? Is it radically different than how you wrote on your own?
Yeah, I think it's really different in ways that are kind of awesome, actually. So when Jeff and I sat down to start planning out Sunrise Nights, we had a sense of the general structure of the book and the form. We knew the characters. But really, we wrote this book maybe 5 pages at a time, where I would write a poem or 2 poems and a stretch of dialogue. I would text Jeff, tag, you're it. He would hop into our shared Google document and he would take over. And so the book is written at the beginning of every chapter, it'll say Jude's name or Florence's name. And so obviously for the poems, that means we're inside that character's head. But for the stretches of dialogue, we are really getting both Jude's voice and Florence's voice. Maybe we'll get like the occasional thought from the character who we're writing. And so we really had the opportunity to write both of these characters, which was really fun. So what that meant for the writing process, I would write 5 or 6 pages, I would send them to Jeff, and then Jeff would take a look over the dialogue I had written for Jude. And he would make tweaks and make sure that it all sounded the way he wanted Jude to sound, that it all squared with his understanding of Jude's experiences and Jude's past. But, you know, one of the most fun things about working on this book, first of all, it is amazing to write 5 pages, to click a button, to have the book disappear and then come back to you with 5 pages that you haven't written. It is like the best feeling in the world. I highly recommend it. Jeff was saying that it felt like elves were working on your novel while you slept, and that was really the experience. So that was incredible. But also when that book would come back, when the manuscript would come back, oftentimes he would have taken the pages I gave him and built on them in a way that I didn't expect.
Oh,
And so, because we weren't necessarily planning it out beat by beat, I really trust Jeff as a writer. I'm a big fan of his books, and I really like his instincts. And so it was really fun for me to set up, you know, what I thought was maybe a serious conversation, and then open it up and see that Jeff had Jude deflect, and that things maybe got silly for a few pages. And it was always believable, and the instinct was always better than the one that I had initially had. And so not only was the manuscript coming back to me, but it was coming back to me almost with like a writing prompt, where I had something new to consider. I mean, I think everybody should be co-writing. It's such a good experience.
I'm proud of the books that I've written solo, but I don't think any of the books I've written solo feel as organic and natural as a conversation between 2 people as this one. And how could they? When you're in a conversation with another person, you don't get to dictate the course of the conversation unless, you know, you're an awful person to have a conversation with. It flows, you know, it's a team effort, and it flows according to that effort. And sometimes it goes the way you expect, sometimes it doesn't. Whereas when you're writing solo, everything goes the way you expect. You're the god of that conversation. So, you know, that can have its advantages, but one of the huge advantages of writing with somebody is it just has that organic feel. You really feel like you're a fly on the wall of a conversation between two people because you are. So it's a lot of fun. And I just want to co-sign what Bree said. It is so much fun to open up the document and see that Bree Cavallaro has been working on the book. It's wonderful. Highly recommend it.
Well, that's I'm one that did a lot of collaboration as an academic, and the best articles I wrote with other people, right? Whether they were undergraduates or colleagues or graduate students. It's the experience is really wonderful. It sounds like, at the very least, you're editing dialogue along the way. So when you had the finished product, was it shaping other parts and the dialogue kind of held up? Or how did the drafting go? Because everyone knows that works with young adult authors, you don't draft a book once, maybe it's 10 times. It depends on what the deal is. So how did finishing that organic whole for the first time, and then what did you do?
This is probably not the answer to that question most of the time, but we really didn't do a whole lot of work on it after we had finished writing it. It really, I feel like, I don't know, for every 3 books I write, there's one that feels like a gift. And this very much felt like a gift, right? So, other manuscripts, you sometimes feel like you're underground with a pickaxe, right? Going through a lot of rock before you find the jewels. And this one, it really came out the way that you see it on the page. We, of course, went back, added some scenes, compressed some scenes, but um, largely it came out the way it looks.
Yeah,
That's a
it is.
gift.
If you read the version um that went to auction in June of 2022, was it?
21, 22, 22, 22.
22. All the time just runs together.
I know.
You would find a manuscript that looks very, very similar.
So when you say you put it to auction, was it picked up by one of your current publishers of either one of you, or did it end up? I didn't look at it enough to know where it ended up, if it's a third auction publishing house, or how did that end up?
Neither of our existing imprints picked it up. It just wasn't for either of them, and so we went wide and ended up, I believe, in a five-way auction, which is one of the most energetic and enthusiastic auctions I've ever been a part of. And there's actually kind of a cool story about this auction. Bree, do you want to tell the story from the very beginning?
Yeah, of course.
There's a
So
love story to be told here.
there is. So when Jeff and I started writing this book in 2020, I hadn't yet met my husband. But I met him maybe, I don't know, 15 pages into writing this, and fell in love with him. Really, I think I was experiencing one of the things that Florence talks about in Sunrise Nights is the idea of big feelings. And I was having a lot of big feelings for the first time in a long time, which was really wonderful. And I think a lot of that is hopefully expressing itself on the page. But I got married in June of 2021 in Scotland, and Jeff came to the wedding. Jeff was one of my best dudes. We were over there the day of the ceremony. I walked out of the chapel in my wedding dress, and the first thing I did was check my cell phone, which I had in the pocket of my wedding dress, which is a ridiculous sentence. And I pulled it out because that was the day that Sunrise Nights had gone to auction. And so I got to walk out of the chapel with my new husband and find out that we had sold Sunrise Nights in a 2-book deal to Quiltree, which is just an imprint we've just loved and been thrilled with. So there's a great like professional picture that my wedding photographer took of Jeff and I, and I'm like, my arms are like doing something really ridiculous, and I'm laughing, and Jeff's laughing. It was just a really magical moment that was kind of nestled into a bigger magical moment. So it felt
If we
like coming
tr
full.
That's fantastic. So we're in Scotland. I have to know this. I have Scottish grandchildren. I
Oh,
have a daughter who
amazing.
married a Scots, and they were just here all last week. Actually, we just sent them up to Salt Lake. So they're from north of Aberdeen. Uh,
Okay.
and
Yeah, we were just outside of Edinburgh. We
uh,
were in a town called Hewick, and at a manor house there that we had rented for a few days, and it was a small wedding, friends and family. I had studied abroad in Edinburgh
oh,
in college, and so I'd always loved it there, and it was really magical to be able to go back.
yeah, it's great. We were just there in May, what I call second winter in Scotland. You know, we were tricked. One day was gorgeous and the rest were winter again. But yeah, my daughter married a Scots and they've been there now 23 years. Um, so I think they're lifers, but we love that Aberdeen, and we visited Glasgow for the first time. We've got a granddaughter who's going to start college at Glasgow this year. So
Mm.
we went and visited the school with her and did all that stuff. So that was fun. But Scotland's a great place to do romance, right? That's a great place to get a book deal is in Scotland.
It was a
if
great place to
we
get married too.
if we tried to put this whole story that Bree just told in a rom-com, our editor would be like, "No, come on, dial it back a little. Like the auction isn't going to close while she's in her wedding dress. Please, that's too on the nose."
Yeah. That's great. So it's a 2-book deal. So we get to see them again, or is it going to be a sequel, or they don't care what you do with the second book?
So the second book is not going to feature Jude and Florence, but it's going to be in the same form. So verse and conversation. And we are about past halfway through writing a draft of that with 2 new characters, and we're really enjoying it.
And
So
I'd
go
say
ahead.
I'd say it cooks at about the same emotional temperature as
Mm-hmm.
Sunrise Nights. If you like Sunrise Nights, I think you're gonna like this book.
Well, we need to do everything we can to get people engaged in reading Sunlight Nights. It's when I knew I reached out to Jeff, I don't know, about 6 months ago, and I said, "You're writing this book. Let's do an interview when we can." And he said, "Great." And I hadn't known Brittany's books because I'd been gone and I try to keep up, but yours is a genre that I don't read much, except I do read detective fiction. And so when I read I thought, why didn't I catch this, right? So, and it's one of the things I'm going to go talk to some of my friends who are more in your genre, say, why wasn't this book passed on to me? But both of you have really, I think, robust careers in things in different ways. As Brittany's got the series that I think is catching on, and you've got some other things that are going on, and Jeff, you've got this. I hate to use the word right now, but Appalachian bent. Where you've got the kids in the country. Um, so what's next for you each individually as we kind of wind up and give people a taste of where you're headed?
Well, I've got another adult book coming. So this year, a few weeks before Sunrise Nights came out, my adult debut, Colton
Yeah.
Gentry's third act, came out. So I'm continuing to explore that space a little bit, not because I don't love YA books or writing for YAs, but there are some stories that I just want to tell that you can't tell in the YA space, given the sort of rules of YA where it has to be narrated from the perspective of a young adult presently, right? So Colton Gentry's third act is about a middle-aged country star throwing his career away. The book I'm working on now is a story that does have some YA elements to it, but it's a story of a broader youth told in retrospect by an older man who's looking back on his life, telling it to a documentarian. So, so along with the book Bree and I are working on, that's sort of my big solo project.
Good. And Bree?
I am working on right now a mystery novel for adults, and it is kind of similar to Jeff's projects in that I really wanted to talk about this sort of odd kaleidoscopic um, situation I found myself in where I am teaching creative writing at my old boarding school. And I have my old mentor's office and his old classroom. I constantly feel like I see the ghost of my younger self around. And it, like Jeff was saying, it is in some ways a story about youth, but it's also just, I think, a story about a haunting. And so adult fiction seems like a good place to put that. And I'm excited to be writing a mystery again. I wrote the 4 Charlotte Holmes novels and I had a lot of fun doing it, but I also felt like after writing 4 mystery novels, I had used up every single trick in my bag of tricks. And so it was fun having a few years to live a little bit more and to keep reading. And I feel like I have some interesting things to say in this one. So I've really been enjoying that.
And I should say, Bree's Charlotte Holmes character is my favorite character in young adult fiction. And I was so excited when Bree wrote Florence very much in the vein of Charlotte, in terms of just this brilliant, kind of prickly, but beautifully soft-hearted girl. All of the things I love most about Charlotte ended up in Florence. And so I'm so proud to have had a role in a book that features a character like that. It's really been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love the character, and I can see what you're talking about, Jeff. Don't get too close, I might bite, but I really don't want to bite you, but please stay away,
Yeah, yeah.
But I certainly
Don't put your
couldn't bite
fingers through
you
the
if you
bars.
keep coming, right? I like that a lot. Well, this has been a great opportunity to talk about this book, and I think we should do everything we can to keep pushing it out. And I wish you guys the best of luck with the continuation of this book and with the future book.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Dr.
much.
Bickmore. We appreciate it.